When did you realize that you didn't have a normal family? Story 1. When I was 8 and found my parents empty methadone bottles in a bag to go back to the methadone clinic. The next time I was at the library, I embarked on an hour of research using the Encyclopedia Britannica and various medical books and magazines. This was back in the 80s. I eventually figured out that methadone was for drug addicts to stop doing drugs. I read about heroin and how bad it was. I read about what methadone clinics were and how people didn't like junkies. And then, it slowly dawned on me why every day after kindergarten my dad used to take me into the nearest city to hang out in the kids' play area of this weird clinic. The people there were always nice, but I never knew why we were there. I realized then that, even though I didn't totally understand it, my parents had struggles that were much different than those of most parents. I think my parents knew I had figured it out. A few months later, they explained everything to me. They had both been heroin addicts before my birth, but had gotten clean. They both stayed clean the rest of their lives, both too short, sadly. My dad stayed on methadone till the day he died decades later. They were awesome, amazing parents, but the methadone is, as they say, liquid handcuffs. We could never really go on family trips because he had to be at the clinic to pick up his dose, and money was sometimes tight because methadone is expensive. And the most weird thing that made us not like other families was always having this secret, no matter how normal they seemed or how successful their lives were. The past addiction always loomed just overhead. Story 2. My parents hosted Christmas one year when I was a teen. A bunch of our family came over and got super drunk. Our Jewish neighbor called and said we should all stop by and say hi at their Hanukkah party. 10 to 15 drunk people walked down the street barefoot and with pitchers of mixed drinks in our hands. We entered their house and they were having a very quiet Hanukkah with 10 very sober-seeming people eating and talking here and there. That quickly changed to 20 to 25 super loud drunk people having fun, and at one point having a southern rap battle where everyone contributed to the song their best southern accent and southern verses. The next day our neighbor thanked us so much for coming. He said everyone, including the old Jewish ladies, had a blast. Story 3. I'll share some of the less extreme ones. Keep in mind that my parents are actually quite nice and loving. Too much so, actually. But that's a whole nother story. Here's some weird shit they did. Also, they are immigrants. Owen. My dad would wash his ass in the bathroom sink after he pooped. Like he would fill the sink halfway, hop up with his legs dangling off the counter, and would just sit there reading the newspaper for like 10 minutes. Then he'd hop off, drain the sink, and dry off with a hand towel. I was taught to do it too as a kid and thought nothing of it. I realized one day how effing weird it was during an epiphany. 2. My mom would start ripping into me at random. Like she would start yelling at me to do homework. If I was caught up for the day, she would start bringing up other shit that happened months or years ago until she found something I couldn't defend. These sessions would go on for hours and any attempts to stop them would lead to more aggressive yelling or some violence. I'd just be sitting there watching TV and suddenly I'm getting reamed for some sweater I lost years ago. Then shit would transition to how I'll never live up to my brother's success. Yada yada. 3. My parents believed that making a child eat more would make them taller, so they would make me eat. A lot. I would eat until I was in pain and beg them to stop. Then they would make me eat more. Sometimes I'd be crying in pain, but F it. Here's some more effing rice, bitch. There were a few times where my stomach just couldn't handle it, and I'd throw up, and they would set my mom off. She'd start hitting me and yelling about wasting food. Then she'd start eating all over again. 4. Looking back, my parents didn't seem to give a shit about wearing seatbelts. When I was very young, I was sleeping in the backseat of my mom's minivan when she crashed straight into a tree. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, so I flew forward and ricocheted off the seat in front of me. Apparently, I bounced back and went headfirst through the rear windshield. I just remember waking up in a muddy ditch. I was told my mom popped the airbag with her face. I was with my mom when she crashed 2 more cars, and I don't think I was wearing a seatbelt any of those times. I remember once somersaulting from the 3rd row into the back of the driver's seat during the time she crashed in the city. None of us ever really learned from these events, and I would often ride in the minivan by folding down one of the 2nd row seats and riding on top of it as if it were a horse. No seat belts, of course. We went on effing road trips like this. 5. None of the doors in the house were allowed to be closed. At all. So we would shit with the doors open, sleep with the doors open, shower with the doors open, etc. The entire effing house had a mandatory open door policy, so there was never any knocking or warning. If a door was closed, my mom would violently open it and start interrogating me on why it was closed. My mom said the doors needed to be open so that we didn't suffocate to death if we fell asleep in one of the rooms, but I'm still not convinced that it wasn't at least partially for surveillance purposes. Anyways, since we only lived in small houses and small apartments, you could hear everything, everywhere, at all times. I got pretty good at stealth jay-offing as a teenager, but my parents had to have known. Bonus. One time I couldn't find my English homework in my backpack at the beginning of class. My teacher was furious and made me call my mom. Mom vows to punish me. My English teacher gives me extra homework for that night, and my grade takes a hit. So I got home later and asked my mom if she had seen my English homework. She pulls out a handful of papers and gives them to me. Lo and behold, it was my essay. I asked my mom why she had snuck into backpack and removed my assignment, and she told me that it was my fault for having a messy backpack. So I still got effing punished. I still had to do the effing extra homework, and I took a full letter grade penalty on the effing essay because I couldn't come up with a way to reasonably explain why my mom looted my backpack and only took out my homework. Plus, I was weirded out by the privacy invasion. Story 4. When I always had people saying that it's so cool how much we do together. Not to brag at all. That isn't what I'm getting at. My family does everything together, and not because it's forced, but because we want to. We play video games together all the time, and I'm not talking about the typical, oh, we play video games together, stuff where they play the Monopoly Fun Pack or whatever. We play EverQuest 2, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, Warcraft 3, Age of Wonders 2 and 3, Mass Effect 3, Smash Bros., Diablo II, Diablo, Sword Coast Legends, Quake, etc. We are super excited about Cyberpunk 2077 and can't wait for that. Our idea of a typical family night was either that, or instead of just watching a movie, we would watch our dad play through whatever he latest struck. It was a ton of fun all sitting down together on the couch to watch him play through the Mass Effect trilogy. It was like an interactive movie for us. Right now, it is Final Fantasy 15. We have 3 PS4s, 2 PS3s, 4 computers, tons of old game systems, SNES, NES, GameCube, PlayStation, PlayStation 2, etc. Tons of board games like Twilight Imperium or Axis and Allies. Me and my mother both have 3s, and we are always playing Fire Emblem or Pokemon, visiting each other's My Castle, or trading Pokemon and helping each other out. We even play D&D 3.5 together, along with Cyberpunk and Heroes system. It's all in my dad's own created version of an alternate Earth. They all tie in together too, like one big mku. D&D is the past before a big cataclysm. Cyberpunk and Heroes are simultaneous. Some D&D characters have made it to the future, whether through time travel, or for example, my latest character got turned into a weird vampire-like being and is still alive in the future. My dad is a huge comic book fan. He has 2 large plastic tubs full of X-Men comics from the 80s and 90s. We all go to the day of a release of a Marvel movie, or really any movie we are interested in. That and anime. My mom was actually the one to get me into that. We got our dad watching RWBY now too, So we binge-watched that a week or so ago. Football is also a big deal. My house, my whole family is a huge Patriots fan. My dad also played football in high school. And so does my brother. My dad jokes around about being the jock turned geek when he was in school. And it's not like we aren't social either. My mom runs organizing the overheads and various teams for our church. My brother is one of the middle school youth leaders. I help with the overheads for church itself, the slides and the computers that have everything on it for the service like videos. We hold neighborhood cookouts for holidays like Halloween. I'm part of a club at the college, etc. There is a lot more we do together too. And like I said, it's all willingly. At this point, I'm in college, and I'm close to my 20th birthday, and I still love hanging out with my mom, dad, and younger brother for an evening. Our dream idea is that we all live near each other so that when me and my brother inevitably move out and get our own lives, we still live close enough that we can still do things together. This was all normal to me, though, because I grew up with it. At the same time, we are this way because we have gone through some really rough times where all we had were each other. My mom had cancer, which left her with a really weak immune system, and diabetes, sickness, rough spots financially while my dad went through college, moving all the time, etc. The more and more I talked to people about it, though, the more I realized that the experiences I have had with my family aren't normal things, which makes me appreciate what I have even more. Story 5. I was 10 so in 5th grade, a super misfit at school. I dressed like Dawn Wiener in Welcome to the Dollhouse, and I was awkward and weird to boot. My dad and stepmom were super obsessed with my grades to the point that they'd schedule multiple conferences with my teachers outside of the usual parent-teacher conference. My grades were all A's with maybe a B or two. It was overbearing and beginning to bother me. What made things worse is that I'd recently discovered while snooping through my stepmom's things that she was running a side gig as a stripper, and she'd go to these meetings at my school in embarrassing stripper-like clothes. Casual stripper clothes. The kids would see her and tease me so much about it. That's when I realized that my life wasn't normal, and I needed to get the F away from those people. Story 6. Pretty early on, my sister was 11 years older than me, and made me do really horrible things to myself like eat cigarette butts and boogers. She was always an alcoholic and drug addict. First DUI at age 13. Woohoo! And she always had boyfriends living with us. They never had jobs and ate all our food. My mom enabled her to the point of debilitating her finances, so having no electricity but ample amounts of freeloaders and kegs was a frequent problem. I didn't know it until about age 25 after the autopsy, but my mom was hooked on opiates, and that explains why she would fall asleep standing up, or pretty much wherever she was. My sister would always beat up her boyfriends, and one of them tried to kill her in her sleep when I was 14 or so. Another one broke into our house and shit in our basement after she dumped him. Oh, that reminds me. My sister was obsessed with assholes. Like, really. So pictures of people's literal asses and the holes of asses were a constant thing. My sister cracked the door open and made me talk to her while she did it. Do you know how traumatizing that is to witness on a daily basis? Yeah, I realized as soon as I was born that I was pretty well. Story 7. I realized probably most when I was in my early 20s and thinking about kids, and I was like, wait, I wouldn't do that to my kids. But I remember going to people's houses or chatting at school and being confused as to why they weren't terrified of eating. Like my mom made us run kidnapping drills for when we all went to get groceries. So not even when we were alone, but when we went as a family, we still had to be prepped on what to do in case of a pedophile. And I asked her once if I could do odd jobs for the neighbors to earn some pocket money. Bear in mind I was 13 and we lived in a small country town and had known our neighbors well for over 20 years. And she told me a story about 2 little kids doing that, and how one got tied up and raped and then decapitated while her sister was forced to watch. Like, just tell me you don't want me to do it, Mom. Story 8. When asked what I did in school that day, I said we did an anonymous survey to see what our families consisted of. Until then, I didn't realize it was strange to be raised by your grandparents, as only one boy in class was aside from me. My mom overheard this and started screaming at me that I had to change the answers when I got to school the next day. Even though I explained we already handed them in, and they weren't signed, she was flipping out over it. I didn't understand and apologized for somehow messing up. My grandma said nothing. As an adult, and knowing how much my mom is a fuckwit, I realized that she was upset because she'd be claiming me as a single mother and that she lived alone in our home with me to get assistance. My grandparents had a different address on the same property, and I learned that I had to pretend I was living with my mother only because of it.